Awesome. Well, hello again. My name is Chelsea Byers. I'm here with Beautiful Trouble. We're running a workshop on strategic campaign planning for the win. I know we're a small group of folks that are a part of this workshop space today in live time, but we are also recording. And so there's a potential that other folks may be watching this after the fact. So I'll try to present with that sort of intention and consciousness in mind that folks may be watching this after. But I also want to, take in the benefit of having a small group of people here today that we can do this work really intentionally with. So thank you for being here. I do have some slides that I'm going to pull up and share as soon as I get them together. I am curious to hear from folks and their experience with campaign planning, with action design and action planning. Just as I did in the plenary session, I have a participant slide deck that I'm going to drop the link to here. The third slide in that participant slide deck is a question about your comfort level and experience with organizing. You should be able to see my screen. And I am curious of the folks in the room, if you want to grab one of these little doodads or icons from the bottom and drop it into the spectrum where you feel like you might fit. But tell me about your comfort level or experience with planning actions and or campaigns. If you've never done anything of this sort before, maybe you've attended some events, so you've seen them happen, but you've never planned anything like that. You may want to drop your star at the very far left side of the spectrum. If you've got some experience, you've played some roles, but still have never taken the lead, I would say drop an icon in the middle here. Drop something on the far right. Oh, I'm seeing I can't edit this. Let me make sure you've got an editing feature. You can view it, but you can't edit it. So thanks for calling that out, Simona. All right, maybe give it a reload and you should be able to go for it now. I'll drop it one more time just in case. Sorry about that. Love these ways of engagement. If it was a big room that we were in, I would love to have this up on a board, like take your Post-it note and put it somewhere on the spectrum, or maybe physically move your body and place yourself across the spectrum of experience here. But here's one way you can do it. If there's something else that you've done, I'd love to see somebody trying to drop in and type in there. I'm totally fine with that. This is our white pad or notepad for this room. Add things that are meaningful to you. And if you want to unmute yourself and actually speak as you're doing this, you're welcome to as well. Again, we have a small room we can play with. And I ask about your experience or comfort level to start, because the way that we do these workshops is so not lecture oriented. Again, if we were in a physical space together, we would be moving our bodies, we would be using song and dance and art supplies and all sorts of things. We don't have that type of luxury these days. So we have to find ways to sort of get out of our minds and ears, eyes, listening thing and start to play, start to use things in different ways. We really try to also source a lot of the wisdom around these subjects that we're talking about from the room itself. You stepped in here because you have a degree of interest and maybe even more of a degree of an experience in this. And regardless of how much experience you have as you find yourself being placed across the spectrum, you have your own lived experience and personal experiences, which are different from that of anybody else in this room. And all of that is incredibly valuable. So much of what I want to do or try to do as a facilitator is to elicit that experience from you in this space. So please unmute yourself, feel like you can speak and share your experience. I see a couple new folks have joined what we're doing. And if you don't already have it, I'll just try to drop it once more in this chat. The link to the slide deck, just as we were in the plenary session. We're using the slide deck to engage in real time. Please just use one of these icons at the bottom to sort of tell me where your experience may lie. So of the folks in the room, did I see anybody drop something at the far left? Anybody here totally new to action planning or campaign planning? No, I think we've got a lot more experience in the room so far. That's really fabulous. So I'm going to stop this slide share and go back to my presentation slide deck. Oh, I've got some more folks that joined. Welcome, welcome. I feel like I get to like be on this accelerated course because we all know each other in some ways already. Or you know me at least as a presenter. So with the rest of the time we have today, let's talk. Why do we want to discuss strategic campaign planning? Like really why. I would love to hear from you all as participants, why you wanted to come to this session with so many other fabulous sessions already happening. You've already listened to my voice for the last hour. So what was it about strategic campaign planning that you were particularly interested in hearing about? Simona, yeah, please.
So as someone who's done the rigmarole of planning a campaign already and has been kind of floundering, it's always nice to hear about like ways I could improve and ways that I can contribute more than what I already have been doing. And to see the vast amount of different things you could actually do. You don't have to do typical things. It's really interesting, actually.
Nice, I appreciate that. So trying to find ways to do things better, or you've already been doing some things that aren't working. And so you're curious about maybe why it hasn't been working. Yeah. Other folks, why strategic campaign planning for you this morning?
Marcia here. I would agree with Simona that, I mean, I've been doing this at this point for a long time, but one can always get better, you know? So, yeah, I mean, I think we are in, Kappa is based in a fairly affluent area. And so trying to engage, you know, with in the struggle with how to be supportive, you know, be alongside. I mean, me personally, I have a challenge in that I'm a caregiver, also full-time caregiver. So I can't be in the street, you know, so what can I do, at least not regularly in the street, what can I do from where I am to be of most help? So.
Thanks, Marcia. Thanks for all the work you do. Any other sharing before we move on? I appreciate hearing both your experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that I'm really eager to learn because I often am doing an event and then another event and I have not always understood how does that how do things build off each other and be a campaign instead of just, oh, I really want to do this next event and then the next one after that.
I love that question, Charles. That's so fantastic. And really great to hear you're thinking about how to be more intentional and strategic. So this is great. It's thank you all so much for stepping into the space. It's nice to be here with you all. We know that campaign planning is an opportunity to dig into the elements and ingredients that will make the thing that you're trying to do more successful. I am a planner by way of need. I was a child with deep anxiety and I was such a worrier. I feel like I became a planner because it was a way to sort of deal with my anxiety. I needed to be able to anticipate and have a best or a worst case worked out for any given scenario. Maybe some of you can relate to that being the foundation for your skill set. I'm proud to say that it's launched a career for myself and no longer is planning just deeply attached to anxiety, but it has given me a really great compass to sort of understand and think about the good and the bad at once, right? We do have to plan for both that best case and worst case scenario. We have to know what it is we're trying to do. when I was an anxious child, I was trying not to have a meltdown in public spaces, right? I had a very specific and clear goal in mind. And I would make sure I would orient every single step I would take towards making sure that goal was never real, or was always realized, that I could avoid a public meltdown. So I know it's very simplistic, and we build campaigns to take on challenging political scenarios and upend societal oppressions and ills. I do not mean to be so reductive, but I do want to give us a really solid foundation of thinking about things. And as Charles said, how does one step really stay connected to the next step, right? How are we, if I was a kid just running around in circles trying to make sure that my anxiety was never met in these public spaces, but none of those processes I was doing were connected, I wasn't actually going to reach that goal. I was just going to burn myself out, maybe have a tantrum, like something bad would happen. I had to be really thoughtful and methodical about each and every step I took, right? So I just sort of want to bring that really simplistic expression into this. And I just appreciate being able to build off of Charles' last comments about how do we string together the ongoing work that we're doing towards actually reaching an objective, actually accomplishing a goal. And I know in the anti-war space that may feel even more challenging or confusing because the goals that we have are so big, right? We are trying to end violence around the world, right? Some of the organizations that you're part of you have incredible campaigns that you're mounting. I know in my time in the anti-war movement, we were trying to end drone warfare. My goodness. Like I could feel like a failure all day just because I spent years doing that work, and where did we go, you know? So with that, I think we're already hearing some of the essential elements and ingredients of campaigns, right? Knowing the timeline that we're working with, understanding the goals that we have, the targets. We'll start to break down all of that more, but I just wanted to sort of get us into the flow, get us into the thinking as we get started here. We know that for a lot of people, we have some experience with planning that we can lean on. It may not be planning an entire event, but maybe we've planned an action. It may not be planning a whole campaign, but maybe we've planned an action or a specific event, or even just a communications blast or a volunteer meetup. Heck, we plan dinner. That's something you can lean on as experience. My point is, at that very baseline of planning, there are simple elements and ingredients that we rely on for success. And then there's a lot of room for creativity. So us at Beautiful Trouble having these conversations is just an entire spectrum. I mean, we're trying to do so much in 45 minutes. Y'all, we do these trainings for days with groups. We take folks through the real-time experience of doing their strategic plan, of deeply assessing their organizational assets, understanding their goal, their targets, and what they have available to them, and then developing that campaign plan in real time, thinking through the different actions that are going to be a part of that campaign plan, designing out those specific actions, maybe even executing on those actions, and then doing an analysis of them afterwards to keep fueling the campaign. You can see how intense this work is in an ongoing way, and why we can leave ourselves with questions like, am I even doing this successfully? Because there's so much that can be a part of it. And if our goals are this big and there's that much to do, well, we're totally going to get lost in that middle space. So again, taking a deep breath as we start a journey around a very complex topic that we have to engage with really intentionally, and we just have not enough time to do, frankly, ever in a real way. So let's hold all of that as we move forward. Again, we only have a little bit, but with more time, we would guide you through all of these aspects of a campaign creation. Do folks know the word SWOT matrix? When I say SWOT matrix, I've got head shaking. Great. These are good things to know where we're starting from. How about a narrative power analysis or a theory of change? Some heads shaking. Yeah, so we've got some of this, right? Do we know the expression points of intervention? What about an escalation plan? Charles is interested in an escalation plan, even if he doesn't know it. These are some of the things that we think about. And what I could imagine is that you all sort of understand these concepts, but in the more practical ways that they actually play out, right? Maybe you haven't been thinking about campaigns in this really big, large way. Maybe you've thought more specifically about the ways that you show up to make that campaign possible, not how you would design or be an architect of a campaign. So we're going to kind of float around this space. Think of yourself as an astronaut, sort of hovering around this planet that is the world of strategic planning. for campaigns. We're going to do our best to really think about it, examine it, maybe jot down some concepts that we just do not have enough time to get into. Like, holy cow, there's an entire dark side of this planet we just aren't even going to be able to float to, but I want to know to get back there. So I'd encourage you to take some notes for yourself today, because we're only going to touch on the topic, or the top of a lot of these topics today. But the good news is that you have this point of connection now with me. We're here to support you in an ongoing way. So again, Beautiful Trouble does all of this work in a really ongoing way. You were a part of the plenary, so I don't have to dig back into a lot of this too much in depth. I did mention that everything that we do, it comes from the hands of really folks who are really experiencing this work from their own lives. Most folks have come to be a trainer because they were campaigners or activists, and they just wanted to keep sort of thinking about these things in bigger ways with groups. So there were trainers by way of our own experiences. We offer everything from 1-hour introductory webinars to week-long intensives. Like I said, we can really do this stuff for days and days and days on end. All of this work is really hyper tailored to the needs of the specific groups that come to us. In a case of a workshop like this, where we're in a conference, unfortunately, we can't tailor it to the very specific needs that y'all have. I would love to know what the goals are of each and every one of your campaigns and the in and out struggles that you've had, but we just don't have that type of time. So we have to think of this like we're all on that sort of planetary journey as astronauts and float around that space together. We really try to stay grounded in a popular education framework and a really highly experiential framework, which is why I try to use these slides that you can type into and engage with. And our trainings are really meant to help equip change makers with those core strategies, tactics, and principles that help make activism the world over effective and creative. So we prioritize working with groups led by people of color, women, gender nonconforming folks, and systemically marginalized communities. And we strive to create safe, inclusive, and supportive and liberatory environments in which transformative learning, personal growth, and solidarity can flourish. So I hope we can do all of that today. I talked a little bit about how the toolbox is laid out. If you haven't had a chance already to go online to beautifultrouble.org, it's incredible. We relaunched our online toolbox just this spring. For the past 10 years, we've been working with something totally different. So if you haven't seen it in just the recent months, it's such a beautiful version of this website. And again, it's available in 5 languages. You can just click at the top to translate all of the material. So as you can imagine, if we're working in a multilingual global community space where we're doing the training and there's folks with different language needs in the room, we're able to actually produce those resources in real time and meet those needs. So our trainings can be multilingual. We can be geographic or globally located now because we can do so much of this on Zoom. Anyways, we're making it work and work for a lot of people. So with that, I wanted to share that the conversation that we're having around strategic campaign planning, to Charles' point, is sort of the next question we ask of, I've been doing events after event after event. I've been doing action after action after action. What's going on here, right? Is this all working? Is this a campaign plan, or what am I really doing? I love to think about this. Well, this image is a nail, obviously, and a piece of wood, if you can't see that. Thinking about it this way, that choosing what type of action is no different than choosing what type of tool we use to build something. For example, putting a nail into a piece of wood, right? So choosing something to do in the name of our campaigns or goals is really no different from choosing what tool we'd use to build something. But most of us would rather use a hammer than a banana, right? Oops. But if, as Abraham Maslow says, it is tempting that if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. So what is the point of all of this? We know that without strategic campaign planning, without designing our actions or our events around a strategy, we are not giving our goals the best shot at being achieved. And we may as well be trying to hit that goal or that nail on the head with a banana, right? So our campaigns are only going to be as useful as the tools that we choose to use to implement those campaigns. And that's where it really comes down. So that's where the difference is really made between feeling like you're stringing event after event together or action after action together, and where you start stretching and reaching into that realm of campaigning, right? It's the strategy. It all comes back down to that strategy. The good news is this strategy can be taught, right? Because we know without it, we're not giving our movements our best work. If we're not being intentional with our energy, we're just treating everything as if it's a nail, and we've got the banana that's going to get that nail into the wood. It's just not going to happen. It's going to create a huge mess, a hilarious image in my mind. So we want to be more intentional. We want to teach the strategy. That's what we're here to do and talk about today. We can apply processes and practices to better analyze our contexts and understand what tools and strategies will best support our goals. So it's a great conversation to have, actually building off this anti-racism work, to really think about the fact that what we fail to realize is that when we aren't developing strategy that is meaningful, intentional, we aren't realizing our goals. And therefore, what we're really doing is creating a whirlpool of energy that actually just foments white supremacist culture, right? And I know it sounds pretty horrific to think about that. Well, if I don't have a strategy for my campaign, you mean I'm behaving in a white supremacist culture? That's a lot to think about. But what does it really mean if we're not utilizing people's energy and skills towards a meaningful act of change, especially in the scope of what we call resistance work, right? Or progressive movement spaces? We have to be serious and intentional about doing this work in order to actually get it done. And frankly, our lives depend on it. So when I really approximate how important it is to get serious about strategy, it means like that's where the time goes. And it's so exciting to me to think about hosting one less public webinar to teach somebody a topic of information without actually understanding how that's going to fuel my broader strategy, right? And maybe some of our work is just an education. But if we're launching a campaign to end the drone war and we don't have a specific strategy that's actually going to help accomplish that, maybe we shouldn't, call this a campaign to end the drone war. Maybe we should call it something else. And maybe that calling it something else will actually get us closer towards realizing something that could fuel or set us up to end the drone war, right? It's about being realistic and honest and about setting ourselves up well. So I just want to challenge that in us. And I feel really grateful to have had the opportunity to do so right after the back of this anti-racism training, because you don't often get to say it that way, right? But that's how big of a disservice we're doing to our movements when we're not being intentional with our energy. It's that we are doing the most then to actually recreate a lot of the problems in the world by just keeping us busy and distracted and getting towards nothing that we're actually hoping to achieve. So that's why strategy is so important. But understanding strategy amongst all of the different pieces of campaigning work that we do, or work as activists and organizers that we do, can be really challenging, right? What is a strategy? Is a strategy civil disobedience, or is that a tactic? Or is disobeying civil space part of my objective? It can get so confusing and conflating. So how do we actually break this down and get granular? Well, for most of us, we've been operating at this bottom phase of the pyramid, right? That we can execute a really great public event or put on an epic rally, right? Like how many of us has hosted the whole Me Too march that we hosted was just a march. It was epic. I mean, we got to visibilize survivors on a mass public scale for the first time in LA's history, and it was beautiful. But we said our goal was to end sexual violence, and like, boy, did that march fail. So it's just being really honest about where we set our goals, and what part of the work we're actually doing. So much of us just sit in this tactics and implementation phase, right? We may start to understand how those tactics are a part of a strategy, but maybe because of white supremacist culture within our organizations, we have decision makers that aren't involving us in that, right? How many folks are a part of a communications team that just get handed an assignment because it's part of a larger strategy around the march that's happening, but you weren't actually like bought into the march. You didn't know why that ended up happening. You didn't even know why that tactic was chosen in the first place, but now you're a part of the implementation or execution of it. Just thinking about all those things comprehensively. And why I love popular education style spaces and highly experiential spaces is that we wouldn't allow an assignment to just come across our desk without being able to return back and say, hey, how does this actually like fit into our larger strategy, right? We just sort of create these frayed mechanisms within our organizations where we don't give people an opportunity to question a strategy or to do that assessment work? Is this actually going to fit within our mission scope? So we end up failing or just recreating really dangerous patterns, or instead sort of thinking about our goals in the frame of that bigger and more success, right? Hey, the last event had 20 people at it. Let's try to get 30 people at this next event. Why? You know, for what? Part of this problem is that tactics are totally like the sexier thing, right? It's so exciting to think about onboarding volunteers towards, I don't know, a banner drop over a freeway, than helping them think about what it means to understand strategy and be a contributor to a campaign strategy. Like, welcome to this organization. We love to do flashy stuff, but first sit down in a 12-day campaign intensive and understand how all of this actually operates, right? Like, that's just not how it goes. And that's fine and totally earnest. I was somebody who just got totally swept up into the realm of civil disobedience. I really love like intervening in events. I'm such a good public disruptor. I can crash an event like nobody's business. I love it. But when I started to realize like this was just fun and flashy and maybe getting my organization a lot of great media credit, but was it actually elevating the issues? Were we creating terrain for people to do this education work in meaningful ways? Were we just like stealing the media moments for ourselves and not really like doing much else? Like it just sort of started getting me thinking about this space between tactics and goals, right? And how many gaps exist there, and between goals and then the larger vision we have for the world. And so I wanted to put this tower in front of you. And I'm sort of challenged by the fact that it's a pyramid, because it makes it seem like one piece of this has more weight, or that there's a specific order. Let's try not to think about it that way, but just to visualize how all of this sort of flows. And I think if you can think about anything, how much space is taken up by the bottom, it's where most of us get stuck, or how much energy is really spent on this specific, holding this specific piece within our broader movement spaces, right? I think we can all see that. I'm sure if we looked on the calendar next week, there are going to be hundreds of events across the country on the topic of anti-war, right? Or anti-violence. But how many conversations are we having about our goals as an anti-war movement? How much space is really carved out to us to get on the same page for our vision as an anti-war movement? I think asking those questions starts to answer some of the bigger questions about how effective are we really being, and what is this all for? So sorry to belabor a lot of that. But this is where, this is sort of the big point of all of this, right? So in order to do all this, in order to answer these questions well, the whole aspect of this is to move beyond the stringing events together and to actually develop a concrete vision for your work, right? That is supported by a mission that your group, your organization, maybe just your organizing body feels committed to. If your vision is to create peace and justice throughout the world, that's fabulous. But if it's just the four of us on this call working together to accomplish that, what is a realistic way for us to do that? How do we develop a mission that can actually support that vision, right? Then we do that organizational assessment. That's fabulous. We created a mission that says we are going to create tools and resources to support the world. Fabulous. We do an organizational assessment. Are we actually capable of accomplishing that mission? The four of us in this group, right? What type of skill set do we have? We said we wanted to produce resources for the movement, but actually nobody here is a writer. Maybe we need to do some more work to fulfill our mission, right? We can't even start doing other work yet. Just thinking about it that way, it's so almost backwards. And because of the way so many of us show up in these spaces, we show up to fully formed organizations, right? We get introduced into this work because we went to an event that was awesome and it just is working well. We're moved by it. And so we want to stay with it. We don't allow ourselves to do that questioning or interrogation and start to say, is this really working out well? And then because of that white supremacy culture, we often don't create that space for anybody else to be able to ask those questions. So the same folks in leadership keep doing the same things, and maybe we get some victories, but it may not be because we did it strategically. So I've said a lot about all of that. The answer to this, as the slides with the hammer and the banana showed you, is using correct tools. So much of the conversation that we try to have in these workshop spaces is actually doing breakout groups and helping people practice using tools. Because we're a small group, we can do a lot of this together, and I intend to do that. We only have 15 minutes left together, so I just want to sort of break down the walls use the conversation space that we have today to talk through how this would look in a bigger session. In a breakout space, we would do a mini intro. Maybe we can start chatting some of this stuff up. We would share an example of a best action or worst action. I challenge you to think about this first and foremost, and maybe think about why we would do this, right? A best action, worst action example. Actually, I created a slide of these just in case we were running short on time. These come from a different workshop I held recently. But when asking people what an example of a best action, worst action would be, these are some responses we got. Somebody shared that a good action, for example, was meeting and collaborating with people of similar interests, friends from the National Committee on Legislation, lobbying somebody. The action was storytelling about the human cost of war. Just some examples here. When we do this best actions, worst actions, and really answer some of these questions on this previous slide, what was the campaign or issue? What was the goal? What tactic did you use in that action? Maybe you did a flash mob for peace outside of the Department of Justice or something. Was it effective or ineffective? Why not? Just thinking about those 4 questions around any action we pull off is a pathway towards more strategic campaigning. And I'll say that because 1, you're giving yourself the necessary space for reflection that you probably haven't provided yourself many other times before. So immediately you're giving yourself space to truly interrogate whether or not you were being as strategic as you could have been. It is totally fine to fail at an action. Gandhi called social movements like grand experimenting, right? That we are in a space of experimenting. That if we had the answers to fix the problems of the world, don't you think we would have done it already? Like, we're trying to figure this out, and we should be really earnest in that pursuit. It's messy, it's complicated, but if we're not giving ourselves space to analyze, then we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes. So in this type of activity, you would discover that many of our actions are stellar. They onboard new people, they maybe get media hits, they do something that worked really well, but it probably wasn't the initial goal of the action, right? So that's one big learning that we have. And I'm sorry to just be talking through all of this, but with the time we have, this is what we got. You find out that it's probably wasn't the thing that you accomplished that ended up being such a success wasn't the original goal. So what does that tell you about how we should rethink about the goals that we actually set in some of these meetings, right? And how we get more realistic about the goals that we're setting. It is so exciting to me to think about, if I am hosting a webinar, my goal isn't about getting 50, 30 people in the room. It's about getting one great piece of feedback in the chat. Like something so much more transformational to what I'm trying to do. Like, I just want to see that one person actually understood the subject matter and demonstrated that by having an engaged conversation in the chat. Like, you can get that goal, but like, I don't think we think that granular about our actual goals. And then we stumble into these type of exercises where we're trying to talk about the best action, worst action we've ever been a part of. And we realize that the goodness was something that we almost missed, that we just almost missed. And so we didn't create a way to plan for it. And that's what we're trying to do, is create better ways to plan for the goodness that we too often stumble into by way of trying to create bigger, lofty goals that we end up actually missing because we're not building a strategy to get us there. So the last thing that we really learned, well, there's a lot of things that we learn in a breakout group like this, is that we learn that the reason so often that actions are either good or bad, or ineffective or effective, is that they were not attached to a larger strategy. And Charles really just like gave away the entire point of this workshop, is that we have to evolve from going action to action or event to event and start attaching things to that larger strategy. So when we feel like things were really bad, it's because they did not attach themselves to a larger strategy. They were just sort of this one-off thing. They didn't really make sense. Or even in the case where it may have worked really well, you try to replicate that success and you just can't, right? It's meant to be something one-off, but it's meant to be connected to a strategy that doesn't make it feel so disconnected. So that's some of the things that we reveal. I would really challenge yourself, if you can take a screenshot of this slide, think about using this type of activity or exercise in your own community spaces. It works so well. Even if you're a part of the same group of organizers, somebody will always share a different action that you've never thought of. It doesn't have to be something from their own experience or like lived experience. It can totally be something you've just heard of, right? Like, oh, I heard about Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, and here's why I thought it was good. Here's why I thought it was bad. the challenge I would say as a facilitator, if you ever do something like this, is to keep asking for more specificity and detail, right? If you can't name the campaign or issue, maybe you should try to think of another action. A couple of things I want to share. We don't have much time left. Again, the real key with strategic campaign planning is using tools to develop a strategy that will actually support your goals and fits within the context of your organization's abilities, right? So somewhere between that vision and your organizational assessment, you have to actually have the resources you need to accomplish the strategy that you've set forward. And you develop that strategy by using tools. So some of the tools that we have, and we talk about these in the Beautiful Trouble Toolbox, the good news is I'm leaving you with a free resource today that you can keep doing this type of homework and reading yourself. Some of the tools that we talk about in that toolbox are SMART goals. You see here, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. If you haven't established goals that are SMART, I would encourage you to look at that methodology in the toolbox. This here on the top right side of the screen is that SWOT chart that I mentioned. If you've never conducted a SWOT matrix, you can do this for really anything. You want to understand your strengths and weaknesses, and then the opportunities and threats ahead of you. If we were doing a strategic planning retreat for an organization or just strategic planning for a campaign, we would start with this SWOT chart. It really produces all of the information that we need to work with for the rest of the time that we do that strategic plan. It's such a starting place. We have some other tools here on the screen. I want to get to a couple more I wanted to share with you more in depth. The first is points of intervention. This image shows a local resident who's a grandmother holding a sign that says "Stop now." She's chaining herself to a tree, hoping that her efforts at this point of destruction, where loggers were going to come and destroy this tree, she was hoping to halt the vegetation removal for a highway project in Australia. So this tool that we're talking about is points of intervention. And I hope that this image and this tiny campaign synopsis starts to give you a sense of understanding about what we mean by points of intervention, right? Points of intervention, are those specific places in a system where a targeted action can effectively interrupt the functioning of the system and open up a possibility for change. So here's this grandmother at the place where a tree is going to be taken down, and she puts herself between that point of the tree. It's such an obvious historic example, but maybe we haven't thought about it in that framework of points of intervention. Now, there are several points of intervention. I can list them out. There are 6. Points of intervention are a point of production. For example, a factory, right? If you are a factory where bombs are made. Point of destruction, obviously this grandmother tying herself to a tree. Point of consumption, a retail store, right? A point of decision, maybe a corporate headquarters. A point of assumption, that's sort of a less obvious one, but it's more of a foundational narrative or a place of symbolic importance. So think about maybe like the bull on Wall Street, right? We make such an assumption. That's why that little girl standing there in front of the bull on Wall Street was such a fabulous intervention, because it broke an assumption that people had around that space and what it represented. And then a point of opportunity, like a big calendar event is such a good example of a point of opportunity. But when you think about a strategic campaign plan, I think we miss these tremendous opportunities or intervention points that are out there. And when before we talked about how important it was to think about anti-racism in all of the ways it shows up in ourselves, in our organizations, and in the world around us, we so obviously go to those institutions or those places outside of us, right? Because that's a clear point of intervention where we can disrupt racist activity. But I want you to think about that point of intervention in the scope of a campaign and a target. If you are trying to end Raytheon's connection or like the sale of weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, like ongoing work that's been a part of anti-war movements, thinking about where your opportunities are to develop a strategic campaign plan along those points of interventions will give you more opportunities to be successful and impactful. So that's one tool I just wanted to share with you. And then the next is spectrum of allies. Do you folks recognize this photo at all? This photo is sort of highlighting the radicalization of white students from the North who bust down to the South for the Freedom Summer campaign, right? This campaign helped trigger a critical shift in public opinion in favor of civil rights in America in the 1960s. And again, because a bunch of white kids got on a bus and took themselves to the South, this was able to start unlocking a new spectrum of allyship that was available, right? And there's several reasons for why that's the case. But the thing I want you to take away from this is this tool, shifting the spectrum of allies. Movements seldom win by overpowering the opposition. There's just no way we can do that. We can't take them down. We have to build allies, right? And we use this spectrum of allies analysis. This is a tool for analysis. Again, we want to be thinking in a reflective space about the resources, the assets available to us. The use of the spectrum of allies analysis helps us identify social groups that are affected by the issue and locate those groups across a spectrum from active opposition to active allies. So we can focus our efforts on shifting those groups closer to our position. So I think before we normally think of things that they're with us or they're against us, right? Maybe we think about people who are totally neutral and they just drive us nuts because it's like, how could you still be neutral? But we need to start thinking about those spaces in between neutrality and active on both sides, right? Active ally and active opponent, because everybody has potential to move into a new camp, and that new camp hopefully is closer towards our goals, right? And that analysis helps us do a mapping of what it will require to move each person in that place. That's where it gets really good. It's not enough just to put people on a map and say, great, we got it. That map actually helps you understand a messaging analysis. It helps you understand which specific types of actions will move specific audiences. So again, getting more strategic, right? If you're putting on an event for some general audience and then you have some general goal, again, what are you really accomplishing? Think instead about how maybe you can use an event to activate a specific subset of your audience that maybe hasn't been activated in the same way. And maybe in order to do that, you have to do a conversation a little differently than you ever had. Maybe like the Freedoms Summer campaign indicated, you don't have the correct messengers to do that work. Maybe you got to find allies in the North and bust them down here to have conversations that can be more trusted, right? So that's what those two tools offer to you. And I'm so sorry, in more time, we would have gone through breakout groups and actually practiced using these tools. The link to the slide you have, again, is a practice slide. You can still do all this. I would encourage you to make a copy of the slide presentation if you can, because these are resources that you can take with you and practice, and not many folks get those opportunities. But what we're seeing now is what this would look like, right? I would give you the vision of the campaign, voter accessibility. The goal of the campaign in this instance, again, I just threw out some generics because I didn't get to figure out all the great work that y'all are doing. But this campaign goal would be to stop the legalized systematic oppression of Black voters. And then we would use one of these tools. I would let you pick, because some people like using one over the other, and that's fine. To, you know, the point that Marcia made, I want to know where I could be most effective. That's what we're all about. And then you would actually use the tool to figure out what it would take to do this. And maybe we need more information. We did a lot of research to provide some background information that you would have had to fill out a slide that could end up looking like this, right? You would march through every single point of production. Think about that place where it would literally physically be, and then think about what work you could do to make a difference there. And then same thing on the spectrum of allies. We would think about each individual group, where they sit in that spectrum, right? You can see part of that spectrum. Sorry, these are out of order. And then you would list them all and think about what you could do to influence them, and maybe even go more in depth, what it would cost to influence them, right? You could see how these tools of analysis get us deeper and deeper into the weeds. It may be way too much for some of us, but that's why strategy doesn't happen everywhere in movement spaces, right? But I hope, and again, I have to wrap this up, unfortunately, but I hope that this gave you a sense of what's available to you. I hope that you can use the Beautiful Trouble Toolbox online to learn more about these tools. The methodology section on the toolbox is where you'll learn all of these and more. There's dozens of them, so take your time. And I hope this was a good start, but we're at time, so I'm so sorry. I want to let you go so you can get to your next session. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Yeah.
Such great